Welcome to Web3 and Whiskey, a podcast about how the decentralized internet will change our lives. In each episode, we react to a future when users and communities have all of the power and when our digital lives are going to be more vibrant than our real life. And we drink whiskey while we're doing it. I'm your host, Gary Liu, and as always, I'm joined by Suresh Balaji, the founder of the Web3 Marketing Association, and Malcolm Ong, a product leader and serial entrepreneur. We also have Disco Wolf with us, our producer. But the best part about today's podcast recording is that we are in person for the very first time.
IRL, baby.
It's ironic. We talk about Web3, but being in person excites us so much. We're the last generation. Right? So this is our behavior. We're talking about the next generation's behavior. I don't think the next generation will be as excited as we are to see each other in person and to taste whiskeys and chat in person. Quick disclaimer before we get going, we don't show projects on this podcast, so consider everything we say to be personal opinion, and our personal opinions should never be taken as investment advice of any kind. So not only are we in person, I'm in a collared shirt today. I don't know what happened. I woke up this morning and I thought, I'm going to see you guys in person. We're going to do this IRL recording, and I should probably put on a real shirt.
Wow. And look what I put on. A Twitter jacket.
My goodness.
I spent like 45 minutes looking for this morning.
Okay. All right. That will come into play later for sure. How you doing, Malcolm?
I'm in my black uniform. So.
Yeah. Yeah. The only thing, your background has changed, so people know that this is a different day, a different recording.
Yep.
The rest of the time, I'm in my blue shirt, you're in your black shirt. We could have just recorded all of these in one day and pretended like if we've been having conversations for weeks.
That's probably what we should do. Hey, but here's the thing. I sort of posted/tweeted about there might be a point when we will not know the difference between when we are in the metaverse and when we are IRL. So how do you know we are not in the metaverse right now?
That's true. This is just a huge green screen, basically.
This is it.
This is a fancy green screen. I mean, the amount of VFX processing to get the, I guess, cloudy and rainy view of Hong Kong behind me.
I think the Turing test equivalent is for the metaverse. I'm going to call it the slap test.
Slap test?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, exactly.
He's within arm's reach today.
Exactly. This is, not too far.
This is all before whiskey, so we should probably get to the whiskey before the slapping begins. Another change for today, we have one whiskey that we're all drinking because we're in real life. So I brought an 18-year Ben Nevis. Now, this is, once again, an independent bottle, another one of my IBs. This is a Douglas Lang. I own a lot of Douglas Lang old particular cask, single cask whiskeys. Now, the Ben Nevis is a very small distillery. They only have 4 stills, 2 wash stills, 2 spirit stills. It is in the Highlands. It is actually quite rare, a whiskey to find, because they really only have one original bottling, and then all other casks that they produce, which is not that much compared to most other distilleries, are sold to independent bottlers, including Douglas Lang. And this is 18 years old. It is a one of 290 bottles, which makes sense. This means that it's from a normal sherry butt cask, which produces anywhere from 300 to 350 bottles. Now, Ben Nevis specifically, it's owned, by the way, by Nika Distilleries.
Oh, really?
So it's owned by the Japanese.
Wow.
Interesting.
So you can taste some of that precision. But the interesting thing about this is that Ben Nevis has always been, and proudly so, non-chill filtered, which means they don't do this process that removes the sediment from the whiskey. Now, whiskey purists believe that sediment adds character to the whiskey. The Japanese like to chill filter their whiskey because they like clean whiskeys. So this is Japanese owned distillery that really does. I mean, it is a proper Scotch distillery with Scottish malt masters, not chill filtered. So there is sediment here. And even in your drink, you might see some cloudiness, and it'll come through in the actual whiskey itself. So gentlemen.
Oh, cheers.
Cheers.
Oh, thank you for sharing.
Yeah.
Cheers.
Let's, we can
we can actually do cheers. Yeah. Wow.
Yeah. We don't have to add the sound effects after the fact.
And I must admit, the weather outside this afternoon in Hong Kong looks like you're in the Highlands somewhere.
It really does.
I can see
Look at
behind
the
you,
Highlands.
Gary, on the screen.
Look at that.
Clouds.
You don't have buildings like this in the Highlands, though.
I love sherry cask.
You can taste it right
Wow.
on the tip of the tongue. It just warms you up. It's not a super long finish. You can definitely taste the sherry. I don't know what else is in
Yeah,
there.
I can taste some caramel right halfway through.
That color is also beautiful.
Yeah.
We have water glasses today. We brought everything. We brought all this equipment around us. We didn't bring whiskey glasses.
But these
that's
are
okay.
these are beautiful water glasses.
They are. Okay. Well, glad to be sharing this with you guys.
Cheers.
Cheers, mate.
All right. Now, the main discussion is whether or not Web2 companies can win in Web3. It's really a what if. What if Web2 companies win in Web3? This is really part 2 of a conversation we started in the last recording. The last conversation, to remind our listeners, was WTF is the metaverse. And just as we expected, we actually created more problems than we solved. Right? I said going into that, if you ask 5 people what the metaverse is, you're going to get 6 opinions. And with the 3 of us, we ended up with 12 opinions. And there are plenty of things we disagreed on. There are a few things that we agreed on. So let's recap a little bit. Our conclusion after that conversation last time was that, well, we don't have a conclusion. We have some disagreements. We don't know exactly what the metaverse will become. Some of the major things that we didn't align on, number 1, does the metaverse have to be 3D or immersive space? Okay. Malcolm thinks that it does. I do not. How decentralized should the metaverse be? And of course, are walled gardens and these big companies getting involved, is that good or bad for the development of the metaverse? All right. Suresh seems to think that it is a very important first step. It makes a user experience easy and therefore it can scale. I think that it will create all of the wrong incentives and set the wrong path forward for a decentralized internet. But optimistically, we did agree on a few things. It is a big part of the future. Digital identities, virtual asset ownership, all the things that we've been talking about for several months now. The metaverse is really the expression of all of that. The second thing we agree on is that it provides an incredible new canvas for creativity and creation. The third is that brands absolutely need to begin learning about it and experimenting with it right now. And then finally, it's not yet ready for scale. So none of us believe that the metaverse has arrived. We're in process. There's a lot going on, but it hasn't yet arrived. So today, we dig deeper into one of those disagreements, the role of the existing big tech giants in the development and the growth of Web3. Yeah. The metaverse, Web3. Yeah. Is it good? Is it bad? Is it even necessary? The first question I'm going to throw out there, and since we're in person, I'll let either of you take this. The first big question, is it possible for Web2 giants to actually be successful in Web3?
I think it's absolutely possible. Whether or not they can pull it off is a different question.
Yeah.
Right. But the thing that comes to mind for me is the innovator's dilemma, right? Whenever new technologies come on board, and Web3 is definitely a massive new change to the internet, the question is whether or not these incumbents can transform themselves to adapt to the new environment. You think about the Microsoft and the IBMs of the previous generation, of how they've reinvented themselves, right? Microsoft, for example, previously a Windows company, now not a Windows company anymore. IBM used to sell servers. They're now a consulting company, right? Very exactly. Different. And so the fact that they've been able to basically say, hey, we can no longer rely on our biggest, revenue maker right now. We need to actually invest on a completely different side and maybe even go against what the market and what Wall Street wants us to do. It takes that type of leadership and decision to change. And I actually think that's why we saw what Mark has done with Meta. It's one of the few companies that actually still has the original founder as the CEO, right? And so I feel like this is why he's getting so much, backlash from Wall Street. But at the same time, it's like he himself knows that he needs to make this type of decision. Now, whether or not they will actually win, it's a different story. Yeah. But you need to make these types of decisions. So yes, they can absolutely own pieces of it. I don't think it's obviously going to be just a shift. Like not every company from Web2 is going to become the Web3 giant. Some will make it, some won't, right? Yeah. The ones that won't are going to be the Xeroxes and the Blackberries of Web3.
I agree, right? I want to sort of dig deeper into the innovator's dilemma or the incumbent's dilemma, right? I think it's quite interesting to see the question about the question always is, will incumbents get innovation before disruptors get distribution? Innovation and distribution are two proper levers that you need for growth. Interestingly, what we saw in the world of fintech was, a lot of these innovators came about saying, yeah, we want to disrupt the big banks, we want to disrupt banking. Eventually, all of these fintechs, most of these fintechs at least, became suppliers to the big banks. So they integrated. That's the first part. Because it was not easy to get distribution, it was expensive to get distribution. You go through capital cycles and you don't have enough money. Then eventually you figure out, yeah, I don't want to do B2C. Let me go and do B2B. It's easier for me to plug in. So that's the first thing. That's the sort of first trend that we've seen so far. That's going to happen. The second point is Web 0, Web 1, Web 2, and Web 3 will all coexist. We have seen that happen as well. When Amazon bought Whole Foods, everyone's like, hey, what's going on here? Why are a e-commerce company buying real life stuff? Real life is not going away, folks. Yes, I might have a digital twin, with an AI going and collecting NFTs when I'm asleep, but Suresh is still going to drink whiskey. So, and he needs friends. He needs to hang out. There's social connections. So it's interesting to see what Web 1 and Web 2 companies will do. Web 3 is the next generation of the internet. It is not the be all and end all of everything, in my view, right? It is a new facet. It is absolute human genius. When Satoshi Nakamoto wrote that paper, you can own a piece of the internet. That ability to own a piece of the internet infused into your existing business model is going to make your existing business model really powerful. And to your point, Malcolm, some businesses will get it and be able to take the leap. Some businesses will get it and they will try to take the leap and fall. Some businesses will absolutely not get it. And that's okay too, because they will still have a role to play in the planet.
So the difference between the banks that you mentioned, and the two of the big ones here in Hong Kong are HSBC, Standard Chartered, and having integrated a lot of these fintechs into their business. The difference between that and Meta, I think, is like there's an ocean in between. And what I mean by that is that HSBC and Standard Chartered realized, hey, we can't necessarily build all these things internally. So we are going to integrate with the tools that other people are innovating. So their innovation is not just from within, but it's also from without, right? Facebook or Meta, on the other hand, have decided, no, we're going to create it all ourselves. And in fact, they have effectively rejected everything else that has been innovated that has led to this moment, right? This J-curve moment for Web3, right? And blockchain-based technologies and applications for consumers, and said, we will do it ourselves. They tried to invent their own cryptocurrency and DM. That did not go well. They tried to build their own layer 1 protocol. That did not go well. Now they're saying it's my metaverse, not an open metaverse. It's my metaverse that's going to matter. And they're deploying it right now for work first, for whatever reason, right? And so it is that walled garden closed ecosystem. And it's not quite working. And I mean, the argument is it's way, way too early, that this is news narrative driven. And I get all of that, but it's not working right now. So my question back to the two of you guys, is it not working because it's too early to tell? Or are they doing something clearly wrong that they need to change?
So here are three things that Meta has that others don't, right? The first thing is, there is no other platform in the world that has 3.5 billion users. Half the planet is on one of Meta, either of Meta's platforms, right? So, or any one of three Meta's big platforms. Now, there's so much that one can do with 3.5 billion users. So the question about distribution is a big one. We have seen all of these players talking about the open metaverse. They're struggling with daily average users. 38, 40 people every day. Holy smokes. What are we talking about? Their valuations are in the billions of dollars. That's number one. The second one is, there might be a point when Meta will say, yes, we will acquire some companies. They will try doing it themselves and they will go away and acquire. This is what happened with banks during the Web2 revolution. When digitization happened, everyone tried to build stuff themselves and they said, holy smokes, yeah, we can't do it. Let's go and play with the fintechs. That's number two. And the third one is, right or wrong, to Malcolm's point, there is a decision maker. And it's good that somebody is making decisions around the prospects of the firm. And I mean, everyone loves to hate Zuck. Apparently his ratings are worse than Trump's that ever was. I don't know whether that's true, but hey, here is the thing, right? Somebody is trying to figure out how to take a leap into it. Now the bigger question is, it's beyond Meta, right? It's the entire ecosystem that sits around Meta. It's the brands that work with Meta. It's the agencies that work with Meta. It's all the partners that they have. It's all their talent. There is going to be a groundswell that's coming out of this. Whether they'll win or not, exactly, I don't know. But I think those three ingredients are pretty cool.
So if you were sitting on Meta's board,
Yeah.
and Zuck came to you and said, and actually asked for advice, you would say what? Just press forward?
I would definitely say press forward, but I would also say that let's learn from some things in the past and let's look at other industries that have done this during the last big disruption phase, which was Web2. And let's try and figure out if there are other ways to do it. Maybe they need a skunkworks to go and figure out the new ways of doing it. Maybe there are a bunch of people who need to think about interoperability and open architecture and all of that stuff.
I mean, it's too late for skunkworks. They've turned their entire company into this thing, right? They've renamed the company for this thing. Yes, they still have core businesses that are throwing off a lot of cash, but that's declining. I mean, by crazy amounts every single quarter. And they're pouring over $10 billion a year into this. So skunkworks time is over. They decided not to experiment. They decided to go full bore. And great. Give them credit for that, for sure. But skunkworks time, I think, for them is over.
I think this is a necessary move for them, though, right? It's like, I mean, they have to defend themselves. They have to prevent themselves from being, has been in a sense, right? So what he's doing is taking that necessary step that most companies will not, right? Taking that necessary step to make that gamble.
Okay, fine. Give him credit for taking the necessary step, but why this direction?
Because that's who the company is. I mean, for the history, it's always about these closed gardens. And so they're not going to be, I don't think it's in their DNA for them to completely change and say, now we're going to adopt decentralized technologies in a sense, right? They're going to do their own version, right? Apple's going to do the same thing, right? Apple's always going to be this like late follower that kind of waits for people to like do their thing and then come in and basically create their own garden as well. Right. Now, if there's any big tech giant here, maybe Google is the one that's kind of a little bit more developer friendly, a little bit more, open, open source, open platforms, decentralization, etc. But I mean, Google, like the only way they make money right now is advertising.
Okay, so let's talk about Google, right? Because one thing I do want to challenge Suresh on. Facebook is not the only big giant out there with 3.5 billion users, right? Google, who knows what the total unique users for Google is, but Google search at last count, at least 4 billion users, right? Sure. 90% of the search marketplace. Android installed on over 3 billion devices at this point. Gmail itself has 1.5 billion. So I think Google also has the platform and they're doing it differently. How is Google approaching this Web3 innovation or innovator's dilemma problem?
Well, I don't see Google doing anything big and meaningful, right? There are now, I just read recently that the chap who founded Chrome has gone away to another startup where he is creating, a sort of Web3 browser. Brave is out and about, trying to be a competitor. And to Malcolm's earlier point, 95% or maybe over 90% of Google and Facebook's revenues are still advertising. So their focus is, how do we get more advertising dollars from brands? And your brands at this point in time, yes, there are Web3 brands. Yes, there are Web3 native brands, all of that stuff. But brands are brands. Brands are still in the Web0, Web1, Web2 world. They're still going to Unilever and asking for their advertising budget. And that's what they're all about. So let's discuss, what are Google doing to take a leap into Web3? At least Mark's taking a big leap. I have not heard Sundar talk about Web3, or maybe he's spoken about it, but I don't see them.
What Google has announced is that their focus is on infrastructure. So what they are doing, and they're being much more active on in the last few months since their CEO announced this, is that they're taking Google Cloud and they're saying this can be the infrastructure for the decentralized internet. And actually, this started actually in Asia, the experimentation with using Google Cloud as the backbone for decentralized, for building dApps. Started in Asia, caught the attention of executives in Mountain View, and now it is a it is a global strategy. I know what you're going to say. I know what you're going to say about Google using its centralized infrastructure to become the infrastructure, the backbone for the decentralized internet. Go ahead,
You
Suresh.
read my mind. You read my mind, Gary. So here is the thing, right? There is no escape, mate. I mean, you can't have a cloud DAO and it's been managed by hundreds of people who are voting and not voting how the cloud infrastructure should work. 95% of internet cables are owned by 4 companies. Ethereum, 30 or 35% of Ethereum runs on AWS. So I think, the fight to break walled gardens, I just don't get it.
You don't get the fight to break walled garden. Okay, fine. Having centralized infrastructure, because infrastructure is extremely expensive to build and to maintain. I don't think having centralized infrastructure and knowing that there is a point of failure that you're relying on is the same as a meta walled garden, where there is no real ownership in that metaverse that Facebook is building right now. There is no ownership, right? You do not own the avatar. You're legless. Well, now I guess you can pay extra for legs and dancing, but you don't own that avatar. And whatever data or assets you generate in that world is still Facebook's. It's not yours. I think that's very different. Infrastructure, centralized. I get it. Maybe it is a necessity. Maybe somebody will come up with a way to decentralize that in the future. But I don't think it's the same thing as what metaverse.
Well, it is very similar to processes that big organizations have, right? Organizations. I'll take Agile as an example. There was a phase when everyone only spoke about Agile. Everyone was a Scrum Master. Everyone was a hero, right? So here you go. So everyone gets trained on Agile. So the team gets trained on Agile, but then the underlying processes in the enterprise are waterfall. So your team does Agile, then you go and wait in the waterfall for the next department to do what they need to do, right? Then that department does their Agile, and then they go to the next department to do what they need to do. So in fact, the organization then hasn't implemented Agile. So it's the same thing over here. Either we talk about decentralization end to end, and we say that everyone owns everything, and it's sort of Robert Breedlove's sort of view of freedom maximalism, and that's it. It's anarchy everywhere. Or we say here are the pieces where we really think there is value in Web3 technologies, in the ability for us to use the decentralized internet for creating new modes of business, new ways in which we can express ourselves, new ways in which we can look at identities. And that's it, right? I don't think the entire value chain can be broken down into decentralization is my point.
Okay. How do we get there? Like what do Web2 incumbents, what must they do to be successful in that vision of a decentralized world where it's not everything, the full stack is not decentralized, but the parts that actually give power back to the communities and the individuals are somewhat decentralized. And we all agree, I think, that any level of decentralization is good for that next generation, right? It's necessary for that next generation. So let's say we get to this, what people would call Web 2.5, but we don't use that term, right? Let's say we get to that future. How do Web 2 companies participate? What leads to success for Web 2 incumbents? And is there anyone out there that is actually doing it somewhat successfully, maybe a little bit under the radar?
So firstly, I don't want to forget my the thought just that came to my mind, which was when you said Web 2.5. Whatever happened to Jack Dorsey's Web 5? When he said 2 plus 3.
It's still TBD.
And again, just in case our listeners don't know what Jack Dorsey's been going off about, it's not that he has skipped Web 4 and said, I have this idea that is so far into the future. It's the fact that he's saying that he's going to invent Web 3 and Web 2, and he says 3 plus 2 equals 5, so he's going to call it Web 5. I mean, like, why do we pay attention to this stuff? It's just...
But it's pertinent to today's conversation, right?
I mean, it is, but the fact that he calls it Web 5 is just so infuriating. It's infuriating. Yeah. Anyway.
I think it is exactly that, where we need to take the steps towards Web3. I don't think these big companies' incomes necessarily need to be fully decentralized. So to take your example of Google, for example, what if they allowed individual owners to own a small slice of every single node or every single server that they have there? So now you're an owner of a bunch of clusters of servers, and you participate in that revenue. You participate in that, maybe a little bit of governance, whatever that is, right? And then I would imagine that there's going to also be a startup on the other side that basically says, okay, we're going to do this the full decentralized way. And we're actually going to do this using every single computer and node that's out there in the world, including creating a DAO and including that DAO buying up like infrastructure ourselves. So you can have both, right? But I actually think for things like that, that is so hard to completely flip to the other extreme. I think the giants are going to win because they're the ones that are going to baby step the world towards it.
Yeah.
Right. So that's, I think, the thing that companies like Google should be doing then.
Okay, so Google potentially on the right path. I think I would agree with you, Malcolm. I think going the infrastructure route where they have a very clear advantage and a moat. Really, there's only 3 companies in the world that have that moat. It's Google, it's Amazon, and it's Alibaba in China. Besides those 3, no one else can really get into that game. Even Cloudflare can't really get into that game at this point. I think that makes sense. Are there other Web2 incumbents and giants that you guys think are taking the right path forward into this reality, this mixed reality?
Let's talk about this a little philosophically about industry as a whole, right? The whole idea of publicly listed companies, the whole idea of that is decentralization of power in some way to the hands of the shareholders. If you
Hold on. Okay, all right.
Let's get there, right?
Okay.
So now that's the original philosophy and idea, right? But yes, there are lots of big whales out there who own big chunks of shares, and therefore there are activist investors and there are investors, and they kind of, if you think about a Web1 firm which is publicly listed, it's actually fractionalized into shares, and the ownership is with so many people. But of course, it gets hoarded. What is really interesting in Web3 is if you look at tokens and token ownership, it's not very dissimilar. Okay, there are huge whales who own big chunks of big Web3 projects. A16Z, they do 20, 30, 40% of token ownership when they invest in one of their portfolio firms. So in many ways, what is happening is that the original fractionalization of ownership through shares is changing into now fractionalization of ownership through tokens. So who's to tell that this fractionalization using ownership of tokens will not follow the same way that publicly listed companies have gone down?
I don't know enough about the invention of the public capital markets to argue with you about the original intent and philosophy. Yeah. But in today's world, the reason companies go to capital markets is not because they believe in decentralization and they want to give the people the power. It's because they need to raise capital. Yeah. And the easiest way to do, well, not the easiest, but a way to do that, and frankly speaking, provide liquidity to their founders and their employees, have the valuation that gives them the Wall Street Journal, headline, all these things, is to go and say, here's a very small percentage of my company. I'm going to put up as public float. You guys go, retail investors go fight over it. And you still have zero power, right, on what we do, especially tech companies. Yeah. Right? We talk about Mark Zuckerberg, that he is still in charge. He's still in power. Is because from the very beginning, the company was set up, and the dual stock structure means that he can never be deposed. Right? That was the plan all along. So it's not a surprise that he's still in power. So philosophically, ideologically, the public markets, I don't think is as altruistic as you make it out to be. Whereas in the decentralized world, it's supposed to be more so. You are right. It's whales that own the vast majority of it. And maybe we've already gone past the point of no return, which is that because so much of decentralized wealth is now already centralized in a group of people. This is the pessimistic point of view, that it will never truly be decentralized, but at least philosophically, I think it is.
Yeah, and my favorite quote around this is the equivalent is democracy, right? And Machiavelli said, democracy is the best form of government in the hands of the virtuous. Sure. The challenge that we have is decentralization in many ways. I think if we don't create, the point you make is very valid, right? The intent is the most important thing over here. Why decentralize is the most important thing over here. And if the intent is not right, then decentralization can be hijacked.
Okay, so going back to the original question. Yeah. Will Web2 giants be able to succeed in Web3? I think that there is a general consensus that there is a path to success for Web2 giants. Okay, we're not sure who it's going to be. We're not sure who's doing it right yet, but there's a path forward. The second part of the question is what if? What if Web2 incumbents end up winning in Web3 and they are still core to a decentralized future? What is the decentralized future actually going to look like? Are they going to be these giant centralized, like incumbents and behemoths? If they are in positions of that level of power in the quote unquote decentralized internet of Web3, will it really look like what we are all imagining? Are they going to be the good players, or are they going to be, more selfish, opportunistic, controlling powers?
I think it might be perhaps similar to the open source movement, right, that we saw a long time ago, where the whole thesis was very similar in that you have these big companies that control every part of the software. We instead want to release the software out and allow anyone to contribute to the software. Yeah. And so you brought up, for example, Android as a good example, right? Android kind of had that thesis where it's like, hey, we want to create an open platform, quote unquote open platform that can sit on any phone rather than Apple's completely closed, system, or, I think Sony, kind of took the same approach, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And it's not decentralization, it's different. But I actually think we'll see some similar qualities there, right? Where these big companies will basically say, okay, we'll take steps towards decentralization. We'll create a different version of what we do now. And that's the one that I think will perhaps gain a lot of traction. And so in my mind, that's maybe what the world kind of looks like. We'll always have the fringe companies and startups that are fully decentralized. Now, that's assuming that, we're only talking about industries that exist today, right? I think there's aspects that we didn't, really cover here, which is completely new industries or completely new companies that do change, right? That are maybe not touching the big, Web2 giants. I think that's perhaps one aspect. Banking, for example, or the likes of Binance, for example. Yeah, could banking completely change, right? That I think is a little bit different trajectory of where that could go. So I think that might be interesting.
That's fascinating. I mean, I think we probably should have a separate episode about DeFi. DeFi is exactly right. I think you're right, Malcolm. There's some industries where this will be huge, but broadly, the way that the construct that I have in my mind is, I call it the 3C construct. I think about creativity, commercial model, and communities. Those are the three pillars, in my view, of sort of looking at a broad enterprise architecture for Web2 companies thinking about Web3, right? And I'll sort of break it down within a minute if I can. The first thing is, instead of us in big firms having audiences, I think the ability to create communities is the first big one, because of asset ownership or token ownership, all of those things. So that's the first one. The second one is commercial models, using that token ownership to create participation economy, ensuring that one can have all sorts of people sort of participating in the way that your commercial model is developed, your business model is developed. It's another thing, and the last piece is creativity, right? I think the ability for though Web3 is a sort of catch-all term for AR, VR, XR, metaverse, blah blah blah, all of that, etc. I think there is a massive creative leap that's being taken right now, and it's called Web3 is called a creator economy for this reason. And enterprises or enterprise leaders who can harness these three C's, I think, will be able to take their companies across the sort of the stormy seas of the crypto winter.
I don't know how to wrap up better than that, so we'll leave it at that for now. Listen, it's as popular as it is at this moment, especially in this moment to hate on Zuck. We are still landing at a place where we're split on if Meta's closed garden approach can succeed. Suresh, you mentioned that Meta's greatest strength is its massive user base, which is not unique, but it is massive. And frankly, if they can deploy that user base as top of funnel to introduce all of these people around the world into a more virtual, more decentralized world, that could be great. I argue that it's never going to be decentralized if it's Meta doing it. Malcolm thinks that Web2 companies absolutely can succeed, but they don't need to be fully decentralized to play an important part in Web3, that these giants can be taking step-by-step approaches, leveraging their unique value propositions and their strengths to help develop more decentralization, although I think we all agree aspects of the stack will always have to be somewhat centralized. So as far as how Web3 will look in the future, if Web2 incumbents are still mainstays, this will require a few more conversations and probably a few more years to actually shake out. I don't think we have the answer. I don't think right now we want to even submit an answer. But inevitably, it's going to have to be cooperation, coordination, co-creation amongst big players and enterprises that have the power today, and arguably even greater power of an entire global community coming together to say, we deserve better. We need to do things in a slightly different way. So with that, we will wrap for today, and we will definitely have to go on to part 3 of this conversation. But this has been Web3 and Whiskey. Please subscribe to our podcast on your favorite audio platform. And if you don't mind staring at us like we are staring at each other today, go smash like and subscribe on our YouTube channel. Also, please subscribe to the weekly Departures newsletter that further explores Web3 innovations and provides explainers for the enterprise world. Join us next week for more Web3 debates and more whiskey. I'm Gary Liu. Thank you for listening. See you next time. Cheers, gentlemen. Cheers.